All right, this story is incredibly alarming. It does not matter who you voted for. No American should be okay with what I'm about to lay out. Just yesterday, almost 200 employees at FEMA signed an open letter saying that Donald Trump and Secretary Kristi Noem are making this country more dangerous by stripping away protections, stripping funds, and basically taking FEMA back to the pre-Katrina days. That's what they said. And if you didn't know, FEMA stands for the Federal Emergency Management Agency, meaning it is the agency in charge of minimizing the costs, the deaths, and the damage done every single time an emergency pops up. Yet Donald Trump is trying to take us back decades. But there's a second part to this, because when we all woke up this morning, we learned that Trump had fired many of the employees who signed this letter. I mean, this article reads, FEMA employees put on leave after criticizing Trump administration in open letter. About 180 current and former FEMA staffers sent a letter Monday to members of Congress and other officials protesting the agency's leadership and direction. These are people who have worked there for decades. These are experts, some of them just career employees who understand what safety looks like because they worked there through Katrina, through other emergencies, and they're saying we are not equipped. You know, without further ado, I'm going to break down the CNN segment that played just yesterday before we learned about the firings, and then we're going to go in depth about the firings because that's what they deserve. Let's watch this. Make sure you drop a like and double check to make sure you're subscribed to the Adam Mockler feed. We're trying to hit 2 million subscribers and beat our MAGA competitors. Watch.
Katrina exposed fatal flaws in the federal government's emergency response system and led to sweeping reforms. And now, in a new letter to Congress, current and former FEMA employees warn that the Trump administration is undoing 2 decades of progress since Katrina. CNN's Gabe Cohen is here. So what more did this letter say, Gabe?
Yeah, so Pam, what they're calling this is the Katrina Declaration. And what they're essentially saying is that after Katrina, a lot of progress was made to strengthen emergency management in this country and specifically to strengthen FEMA. And what we're seeing today is this overhaul of FEMA at the hands of the Trump administration that they argue is really reversing the progress that we saw. So just a flashback 20 years, you may remember Congress investigated what had happened in New Orleans. They felt that there had been a federal failure, and so they passed legislation to try to empower FEMA, to give the agency more authority and to also raise standards for its leadership. But what we have seen here in recent months is DHS, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, institute strict spending oversight on FEMA, even for disaster funds, and also appoint a head of FEMA, an acting administrator who has no experience dealing with emergency management, who came from the Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction office. I'll read you an excerpt from this letter. The authors say, our shared commitment to our country, our oaths of office, and our mission of helping people before, during, and after disasters compel us to warn Congress and the American people of the cascading effects of decisions made by the current administration. So they are very concerned that we could see the next Katrina-level disaster based on the stripping away of FEMA that we have seen. Now, for DHS and FEMA's part, officials disagree with the messaging here. They said in a statement, FEMA did, for too long, FEMA was bogged down by red tape, inefficiency, and outdated processes that failed to get disaster dollars into survivors' hands. The Trump administration has made accountability and reform a priority so that taxpayer dollars actually reach the people and communities that they are meant to help. And they certainly are reforming the agency, and we're expecting to see more in the months ahead. But there's a lot of concern about what's been undone, not just those policies, the legislation that was put in place, but also the amount of workers that have left, including senior leaders who helped write FEMA's playbook for disasters after Katrina. There's been a mass exodus. Morale has plummeted.
All right, so there's a lot of scary things that I could point out, but can we just go across the board and remember that Trump has now fired the BLS commissioner, someone who is well respected, who's been there for a while, is now gone. So if the next job numbers come out and they're unfavorable towards Trump, we might not even know. He has fired leading health experts at the CDC and other agencies. Many of them have just left on their own accord because they've seen the way this admin has operated. So if we have another COVID-type outbreak, then we might not know until it's too late. And now the people at FEMA, The Federal Emergency Management Agency, the actual agency that takes care of our disasters, they are under-equipped. Many of the senior leaders are gone. Let's read this. It says, the letter signed by 191 current and former FEMA staffers was sent to Congress and top officials on Monday. Its message was blunt. The people now running FEMA are inexperienced, politically driven, and dismantling the very programs that keep Americans safe when disaster strikes. The writers warned that, left unchecked, the agency could stumble into catastrophe. By Tuesday evening, FEMA's administrator's office had fired back with suspension letters. Suspension letters. The employees were told they would remain in non-duty status, but keep their pay and benefits, effectively being benched for simply speaking out. And we've seen a lot of people face repercussions for simply speaking out. People like John Bolton, who had his home raided. And then Chris Christie went on the news the next day and said, don't raid people's homes. And then Trump threatened to raid Chris Christie's home. I just made a video about this, but it is all a complete mess. Ron Filipkowski says, wow, when I first read about this, I assumed this was an anonymous letter, but it turns out they had the courage to sign their names to it, knowing the consequences of a highly vindictive Trump. Lots of respect. And he said that after many of these people had been fired. The same thing happened at the Environmental Protection Agency. Remember, I listed the BLS, which is the Bureau of Labor Statistics commissioner, being fired, people at the CDC being fired, top experts leaving across the board. But the same thing happened at the EPA literally a month or so ago. This reads, roughly 140 Environmental Protection Agency staffers who signed a dissent letter are put on leave. Trump officials placed 139 employees who signed a letter of dissent protesting the EPA's current direction and policies on leave Thursday. This is no longer democracy. When people in the institutions don't want something happening and the people on the ground, just look at DC right now. 80% of DC residents do not want the National Guard mobilized. 61% say the National Guard makes them feel less safe. When they're polled about what they're worried about, it wasn't carjackings. It was the National Guard stopping them on a day-to-day basis. So Trump is mobilizing the National Guard against the explicit will of the people there. Trump is moving these agencies in a direction against the explicit will of all of the workers, the people who are the backbone of these agencies. And I just want to end this off by saying the danger here is not abstract or what if. Just last month, there was catastrophic flooding in Texas. The reports say that 135 people were killed, at least 36 children were killed. Those aren't even final numbers. And FEMA insiders say that a part of that failure traces directly back to Secretary Kristi Noem, who insisted on personally signing off any FEMA contract over $100,000. So all of these contracts that were necessary to save people, to prevent deaths, needed to just wait. Like, there was now a delay because Secretary Kristi Noem had to decide whether or not she should sign off on it. And that very bottleneck delayed the deployment of multiple critical search and rescue teams. You can look this up. It delayed the deployment by 3 days. And in a disaster, 3 days can mean the difference between life or death. So as we read through this, it's just disgusting. Former President George W. Bush was heavily criticized for his administration's slow response to Katrina, where much of the city was left underwater. In its aftermath, Congress passed the Post-Katrina Emergency Management Reform Act of 2006, which added safeguards to prevent another botched response. But now, it seems like this administration is undoing everything. We'll continue to cover this as it happens. It is going to be a busy week for all of us because we have a lot of press conferences, meetings, and interviews coming up. So make sure you subscribe to the Adam Mockler feed. I appreciate every single one of you. We are building something beautiful here, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.